Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Ancerious discussion topic. Today we're going to be looking at laws and judicial systems in world building, and be going on some of the topics such as, what are laws, what are judicial systems, and how do they work. We're going to be going over some examples of such systems and laws IRL, some examples of such within Ancerios, the origins of legitimacy for such systems. We're going to cover international laws and conventions, upholding and enforcing such systems, story hooks that you can use for laws and judicial systems, and using such systems in extreme nation types. Now, I'm actually going to be handing over to my other half today to handle this discussion, as this is a topic she knows very well. So I will let you begin, my dear.
Hello, I am the other half. Um, Jokes aside, name's Kira. Um, let's just get right into it, I guess. What are laws? What's a judicial system? Simple, really. Laws are just rules that people set, that a community recognizes that we sort of use to regulate behavior. So the actions or sometimes omissions of people, i.e., simple one, don't kill that person. Very basic law, goes back a very long time. We love it. It could span laws can span any sort of topics. So there's like trade rules, there's rules regulating behavior, like I said, like criminal things, how companies and entities like that are allowed to act. A law can be anything you choose. The law in your nation is for you to make it. You can create whatever laws you like, which is pretty fun. Linking that into a judicial system is an institution that has been put in place which is designed to interpret, defend, and apply laws. So they are your courts. They are the people that you go to when there has been an infraction, and they're the ones that make the decisions based on what's happened. Many different kinds of courts again that deal with all the different types of laws. You've got your criminal courts, you've got your civil courts that deal with disputes between two individuals, you've got family courts, you've got military courts, which, hands up, I don't know much about military law in particular, but it follows the same sort of guidelines. And as you would expect with any normal laws, they're just slightly altered to be military ish. That wasn't a very good description, but there we go. So yeah, you got all of the rules that are set out by your government or your parliament or your lawmakers, and then you've got the courts that enforce them. How do they work? As I said, the laws are created by your lawmakers, your parliament, whoever it is that you've decided in your nation are your legislature, and then the judiciary enforces them. So yeah, pretty simple stuff. At least I think it is. Um, Examples in real life of different systems. I'll start with the one that I know the most about, which is the common law system. That's what we use here in the UK. It's the basis of a common law is that the judges in your courts also have quite a big say in how your laws are interpreted and what the laws actually are. It's What the easiest way to describe it is your judges, they follow a thing called precedent. So they basically go back to what other judges have said, like maybe hundreds or thousands of years ago, and they apply what they've said to what's happening now. Um, the way this works in the UK, especially with the common law system, is you've got your hierarchy of courts. Some courts are what they say is worth more than others. So your highest level court, what they say is like worth its weight in gold. Everyone has to follow that in like all of the lower courts. That is what your precedent is. And that is a way of making laws as well as enforcing and applying laws. So the common law system's kind of weird like that because you've got your your statutes, you like your codes, your actual laws set by your legislature, and then the judges also have their kind of bits of input, which is pretty cool. So that's one sort of system that you can draw inspiration from. The next most common one is the civil law system. You find that in a lot of countries in Europe, especially like France, Germany. It's based on the systems of laws that the Romans had way back when. It's basically just like, here's our codes, here's our laws, this is a big list of them, follow them, pop off, kid, like, off you go. No one else really has much input on what they actually say apart from the lawmakers. There's no judges that can influence things, anything like that. Quite simple civil law. Then you've got what I like to band under like the religious system. So like Sharia law is the first one that I thought of. Really, it's just laws that are set out in like scriptures and things like that. It's a lot more based on, I'd say, morality. In quotes. It's it kind of, I don't really know too much about them specifically, but you can kind of, if you're making a religious based system, you can make the laws in your nation whatever you want them to be, as long as it's based in like the scripture or the holy text or whatever. Yeah, I'd sort of link military law under that sort of banner as well. It's because it can be really whatever you make it. So those are like the types of IRL that I've thought up. But if anyone has any others that they know of, then absolutely pop off in the comments. I'd love to learn more, but those are the main ones. And obviously, when you're making your nation, if you like bits and pieces of lots of different ones, then by all means mix them together, because that is what is really fun about making your own legal system. You can combine all the different elements that you like to create something that's really unique. So, for example, my nation Vaplana, I based it quite a lot on the common law system because that's what I know, that's what I've learned. But the common law system in itself mixes lots of elements of civil law into it. But you could have a nation that has like a religious system and they also draw elements of common law. Say they've got like priests who act like judges would, like IRL, and the world's your oyster basically. Take inspiration from wherever you see, and pull it all together and make something fun. Um, Other examples, Marek, you've probably got some others from Ankh that are good examples of these different types of systems. EOS in particular, I think.
Yeah, so EOS is kind of like a good example of the religious methodology. So the whole thing about the Eostem, which is the faith that they adhere to, is pretty much a very strict set of codes and tenets that, you know, in some other societies might be left open to some common law interpretation of, oh, you know, this set of codices might be interpreted in this specific way, depending on what morality you're looking at. In actuality, in EOS, it is literally just, this is how you act. If you act differently, you will be punished. There's no fucking sort of like, oh, well, this is an interpretation. It is just, this is the hard law. It is all written in the scripture. The priests are the ones who enforce it. EOS does not have its own dedicated judicial branch. Well, they kind of do, but it's different to like a normal police force in the courts. The priesthood and the clergy are the ones who handle all typical sort of what we would call civil matters. And then there is a special order within EOS itself that handles, let's just say, more egregious breakages of the law. And so you can pretty much take from that what you will. With religious systems in general in Ancerios, and in IRL, you can find that they like to interpret scripture differently. So there's always going to be sects that are like, well, actually, we disagree with this interpretation of the religious law because there was a precedent once where, things happened, etc. It honestly depends. Sometimes in EOS there are different interpretations of the scripture. These interpretations don't tend to last long. There is actually an internal order within EOS that handles like the writing of new scripture, the editing of old scripture. So yes, there is interpretation in the sense of like sometimes things can change, but when the law itself and the scriptures themselves are sort of like set, it's typically a very bad idea for anyone in a position of power, be it clergy or the exemplars, to make their own interpretation, because it typically gets them, shall we say, removed by the by those in power with more hardline overviews. Another sort of good example on my end, at least in Ancerios, is Aurelia. They are a strict authoritarian dictatorship, surveillance state, lots of police, etc. Their judicial system is not differentiated between civil and military. The military and the civil judiciary are one and the same. They have, again, a very strict system of, these are codes that are supposed to be implemented. They do have a lot more leeway in terms of, precedents and interpretations, however, but they are also along the lines of very harsh punishments, a judicial system which is heavily integrated with the military, which is in turn heavily integrated into the state, and the various sort of governing bodies that are controlling everything. So it's not really a judicial system that is independent and able to act for the benefit of the... Well, it's not really for the benefit of the people, although it is for the benefit of the people, if that makes any sense. They think it's for the benefit of the people. In reality, no. It's a way for them to keep power. And so the military uses its reach in the judicial area to effectively implement what it wants. And there's no overarching legislature to basically be like, oh, we're going to pass this law now. Well, no. In this case, it's the military going, well, this is a very serious matter that's just happened. We will now, effectively implement a new code or regulation that will cover whatever has transpired that doesn't exist within the existing codices, effectively. Vic, do you have any good examples of religious systems? Sorry, not religious systems. Bloody hell! Judicial systems in Ancerios.
Well, there's the two main obvious ones. The two ones that kind of stand out, which is Velka Chernyalovka, because it's nice, and the Third Republic of Corona, because it is a complete nightmare. So I'm gonna start with the Corona one because it's funny. As Kira and Marek have said, the judicial system is just a sort of an institutionalization of laws that interact with it's this like interpretation of law and arbitration of disputes. But usually all of this is based on a law that has been decided by another body that is not the judiciary, be it parliament, a dictator, a religious, a religious council, etc. But what happens if your putrid, degenerate state has lasted for around a millennia and has lost all of its institutions except for the judiciary? It means that there's technically no law. That you cannot. There is no book that says that sets out what is appropriate behavior and what is like morally moral trespassing. All you have is the judges, and all the judges have is the president. So the Third Republic of Corona used to be entirely run case by case. Every time that there was a dispute, be it between the like poorest, like most disgusting lumpen Corona, or the actual multinational corporations of Ancerious, they whenever there was a dispute, there was no law who said who was right or who gave an impression of who was right. It all had to be like redecided, relitigated, and re-implemented by a judge in a court, and usually appealed, sent to a court of appeals, and if whoever was the defendant, he still had resources, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. But for example, there was no passing a law that says that funded the construction of a monument in a certain park for the heroes of this disaster. There was, because there is no law, there is no the judiciary just standing on its own. So each time a judge, whenever anything needed to be done in Corona, needed to pass an injunction, a sort of judicial order, and have it enforced by the bailiffs, by the actual enforcement agencies of the judiciary, because Corona had no police and no military either, since it had no executive branch, and all they had to go with was this absolutely colossal like archive of precedents of cases that were kind of similar to the one before, the one that a judge would encounter, and he would sort of base his decision on that. Of course, with his own biases, with his own stupidity, and with his own like context. But and of course, the decision itself would get added into the archive of the president. And at the root of this enormous archive of precedents was what once was the actual law of the Second Corona Republic, which has long been lost. It long became incomprehensible for the degenerate Coronans. So all they had to go from was like the decisions that were taken based on a law that they no longer understood. And every single thing and every single government intervention had to be like separately signed by a judge. There was no like automatic like legalization or regulation of anything. No, if you open your factory, it's not like in our country where you can open your factory and it has to follow the safety guidelines, and it has to be in this place that has been zoned for factories. No, in the Third Republic of Corona, if you wanted to open a factory, you had to start from scratch, because there is no zoning, there is no safety regulation, there is no nothing. You just have to wait until a judge decides on what's gonna happen, and he's gonna decide for you every single little regulation. He's gonna be stupid because he is a Corona, and naturally this led to an absolute like monstrous level of like bureaucratic deadlock that effectively froze Corona in time for the better part of 100 years, until it eventually just completely collapsed, owing also in part to the absolute authority that the judges had. And due to this authority, judges were seen as like quasi-religious figures. Like the only two authorities that a Corona used to recognize were somebody with a stick that's about to beat them and a judge, and usually they go together. There was an extremely short-lived attempt, to actually create a society that democratically decides on its own rules, which was the Northern Star Republic, and it got shredded. So the Coronans aren't much better than they started off. On the completely opposite side of the spectrum, where what Kira mentioned about common law is the country of Velkachanolovka, which is a small country that neighbors the Union. It's in the middle of the most populated and developed sector in Ancerious, and it enjoys an extremely high standard of living, and judges there have a ton of leeway to interpret laws, like not only like this specific law about restaurants, or this law about like child custody, but they have the right and they have the authority to talk and debate questions that concern like very deep levels of morality and what it means to be the subject of law. And they are a pretty kind of open-minded bunch, these judges, and they liberalized the Republic of Velika Chernlovka after it was like a conservative monarchy, and like to push it forward into the serious modern age. And of course, starting off from like an absolutist monarchy, it was like okay, everyone gets the right to vote, everyone gets these universal rights, women get to vote as well, children are protected from in these ways. You cannot make them work. Education is a right, but then they just kept going on what does it mean to have universal rights and who deserves them. And they saw all the other nations, or the average nation of Ancerius, uh, and its own concepts of universal rights, and they kind of thought like, why stop there? Like, why are only why do we just have like human rights? Let's not only have animal rights, let's have plant rights, and have let's not only have plant rights, let's have rights that are guaranteed by the state, by our order, for inanimate objects like a beautiful river or a nice mountain range. And that thing, even though it has no like actual personhood, is recognized as in a similar way as the UN um, heritage sites, and it is as such given a bunch of inalienable rights that cannot be overridden by a commercial need or a civil society to just exist and be preserved in harmony. And this eventually attracted a ton of entities, people, constructs that did not have rights or could not be considered like persons in a normal country, like hive minds, AIs, instances of programs, chunks of the rhizome, all you can think of. And Velkachanolovka kind of made a name for itself as the place that is going to protect you, grant you rights, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you identify as, regardless of your past. You are a subject that is imbued with universal rights by basically God or the sort of secular version of it. Like they just kind of use the logic of the American Constitution of these rights are self-evident. We don't need to explain them. The rights exist, period. And we are going to really specify what these rights are and what the boundaries are. And if these rights ever come in conflict with each other, such as a town wants to develop a place, like a cattle farm, but they're going to have to chop down some trees of this forest that is given national personhood, then the courts come into play and they decide what is the best outcome of this dispute. Like, okay, we're going to chop down the trees, but we're going to plant them elsewhere, and it all goes through the judiciary. which results in a kind of nice nation that is a bit hard to navigate legally, because you never know like what is a person and what is just a thing. But it is a kind of a safe refuge for a lot of people who feel persecuted across the galaxy. And there it is.
Nice. Do you want to talk about Vaplana, Kira?
Yeah, sure. So, as I said before, I sort of use the common law system as the basis for Vaplana, but where their laws get really interesting is the roots of that is to do with their government. So Vaplana is a government of two equal halves. On one side, you have the elected like parliament with all of like the elected officials, the prime minister, all of that, and then the other half is the monarchy, the crown, and they both have equal power and control. And if the figureheads of those two sides do not get along, then there's going to be a lot of problems. But if they get along fine, then things run very smoothly. Um, so, in terms of making laws, you could have these two equal, like, figureheads trying to throw laws in to get created that completely oppose each other. But if the two figureheads get along, then they'll be working together to create laws for the benefit of all. It's a really fun system to play with. I haven't really had much time to develop it too far. At the moment, everything is nice, everyone gets along, but I can guarantee that will not be the case for long. I look forward to playing a lot with the legal system in Vaplana and having this sort of what I like to dub legal ping pong um, of different sides vying for control over what laws actually get passed and the chaos that will ensue with that. But outside of that, there's also the court system, which is like a sort of neutral, independent third party, so to speak, um, that won't get quite as influenced by the political power plays that are in the government itself. And they also do have control, at least some kind of control over the laws due to the common law system with the precedents and all of that. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of the basics of the Vaplanen system I have. It's pretty much a kind of copy paste of what I've been studying here in the UK. So it's not super fancy like Aurelia or EOS or the absolute chaos of Corona, but I like to think that I've got a decent amount to work with, and that's something I would recommend that everyone do in creating these legal systems that they have. If you make something that's like slightly unique and fun, play with the pros and cons that come with those unique features that you create. Don't be afraid to bring them into the spotlight and use that as a plot hook, which we will discuss a lot more later on. But yeah, those are sort of some good Ank examples of the things you can do with a legal system, and you can make it as prominent as you want. So, like with what Vic was saying about Corona, that's like a huge part of like the Coronan culture, I'd say, is like having their judges. You can make it as big or as small as you want, but being the legal girly I am, I would recommend going big because it's just so fun. Um, so yeah, moving on to origins and legitimacy of your legal systems. When you're creating a system, you want to give it the power that you need it to have. And when you're looking at all of these different like examples, think of like where do they draw their power from? Look at the history of the nation. If it's a nation with a big long history, look back, because then you'll get to see where all of these like precedents and traditions have come from. That is where your legal systems draw their legitimacy from. It's the history of the nation itself. So a good like way of thinking of it is if you have a nation that has like a monarch, for example, like Vatlana does, that can be where a lot of their legitimacy stems from, is the power that this monarch has declared for themselves and how they used to do things back in the past. Because very often those roots will inspire what comes later. In the UK, we've got a huge legal history spanning back a very, very long time. And if your nation is similar, use that. It's really easy way to link loads of different like areas of your nation together. So if your nation has like a big military history, then you will have a lot of ties into military style legal systems. Or with the religious things as well. If you have a very like religious based nation way back when in their history, then you might still find nuggets of that in your legal system. Even if the nation has shunned religion like decades ago, you will still find those threads woven in, because the law is something that's always there. It's part of like society, and it's good to tug on those threads sometimes. You can use those leftover relics as another story hook. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is like look back, find something that creates this legitimacy of your law and run with it. Just pick something, pick your poison, find a source and go with it. It could even be something as modern as like a charter or a treaty. Yeah, just find one that you like, find one that you vibe with, and just run with it. And even if you want to change your system later on, that's fine. You can still find those inspirations even centuries after, which is really fun. Law is a great way of showing your nation's history, which you might think, oh, really? But yeah, when you look back at old laws, you get to see the kinds of things that the society thought was a problem at that time. So, and the new laws that are being made today, they're a way of seeing what a society deems as the big problems of like the current day. So when you look back, you can get this timeline and you can sort of infer things that were happening in that nation at that time. And it's a really good way to link to, yeah, history, but also like wider galactic history, because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. So you could have a nation that's suddenly making loads of like trade laws, and you're like, huh, why is that? Then you'll look at another source and be like, oh, they decided to build relations with this other nation, and now they're thinking about all these new trade things that they need to regulate. So, yeah, also look back at your history and think about what's going on at the time to like what laws you're making. But picking up on the trade idea, international law is also something that you might want to consider. It's definitely something I love considering. International law is all the different nations, all these sovereign states, they get together and they just decide how they want to interact with each other. It could be a more informal basis, or you could have something written up officially into a big treaty. And as I said, these treaties, they can range from anything. You can create whatever you want with this. So it could just be limited to trading and business and tariffs. So like, oh, we're going to buy all of this grain from you. This is what we'll exchange in return. Or you could really get down to like finicky business, like say copyrights, or how your citizens interact with each other in terms of like marriages and family and children. Or you could even get into the really juicy stuff in terms of rules of war, rights for people. The possibilities are honestly endless, but especially when you're thinking about international law, think about who you're dealing with, take the people that you're creating these relationships with, and you've got to consider the goals of each party, what each person is trying to achieve. because their goals might not entirely align, but that is something that you can use. So, for example, if you've got two nations that want to trade, but that's not quite agreeing on what they want, write that into the RP. It's a really good story hook to create conflict like that, and that conflict could be reflected in the agreements that you come out with, in the treaties or the charters that you have. Not all laws are written equally, so if you can incorporate these flaws into the laws that you're writing for your nation, that applies both internationally and at the national level. Creating those loopholes is something that you can exploit both at like a national level but also at a character level. Think about how all of these laws impact, like, say, the normal everyday civilian in your nation, and really think about how these people will react to these things impacting their everyday lives. Or you can take like a character who has quite a bit more influence and see if like those types of people can try and have an impact on the laws that are being made. Use all of your characters that you have, because these laws will impact them, and try and weave them into like the story that you're trying to tell. For example, I've got a character that I love writing very dearly. He is my number one arsehole. Um, he is very influential, is Duke Mercia, and he is going to go on another legal battle in my nation. But so take a character like that, someone who has influence, and see how they can like use the system that you have in place to benefit them. It's a great way to tell a really interesting story, and how all of these people in power, how their actions impact not just like the normal people in your nation, the normal civilians, but also like the wider galactic community as well. It's a great way of getting together and coming up with something really fun.
Could I add some stuff about the international law section?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
So another thing with international laws, and that is obviously Ancerios, like at current, doesn't technically have overall sort of like a UN. You know, we don't have like a universal code of Ancerios rights, although that is being constructed in character, so that may be a thing in time. But like something to know is that yes, there isn't an overarching big sort of like, hey, there's a defined rights for every sentient in the galaxy, etc. Just because there's no massive overview at the moment, although yeah, there will be with the Talcet Accords, which are going to try and sort of create an overarching law for the galaxy, at least on the surface level of trying to get sentient rights, etc. Just because that's the case doesn't mean that like your nation won't be held to a certain standard as well. So, for example, international law, even if you're not technically part of it or under its jurisdiction, is still going to impact your nation. Because if you are doing things that you consider perfectly fine, but a lot of other nations don't, you're going to basically influence them against you, whether you want to or not. You know, it doesn't matter if you're gonna try. You know, your nation's like, well, actually, murdering is completely fine. Like, we don't have any rules against committing what everyone else would class as war crimes, for example. Like, we don't believe that the genocide of civilians in wartime is a crime, and we have no problem with conducting that. That's what our species does. Well, that's fine. You might have historical precedent for that. You might have military judicial precedent for that. However, the other 20 nations that just watched you completely gun down and glass a fucking defenseless planet, for example, who do consider that an issue, are going to go, cool, that's your fucking problem, mate. We're going to sort this out, and we're going to screw you over. A really good case for this is like pretty much, I would say, the trial of Inara. If we're going to, bring up some, I guess, kind of well-known historical legal cases in Ancerios, was the trial of Empress Inara for what was done in Capital. And another good example is the High Imperium with the crimes that they committed at Varnal, and the fact that the War Master Alhergus wanted to be, brought in for trial, and the fact that Canton recently nuked the whole of Marchand, although they haven't been trialed, although there might be some sort of political ramifications and judicial ramifications for that post-war. The point is that, these factions or individuals thought that they had, they were above these laws that didn't even apply to their nation. In the case of Inara, she was like, well, Capital doesn't have laws against, using strategic scale superweapons and stuff like this. However, well, it doesn't matter. The AGA won the war. And while, yes, there wasn't a unified codex for human rights, or, well, just sentient rights in general, all of the AGA nations got together post-war, after the surrender and, Inara's arrest and everything, along with neutral nations across the galaxy, and effectively put together a legal case based on kind of precedent and common sense, really. Like, hey, you decided to destroy several star systems and kill billions of innocent people. You also committed heinous war crimes when you, effectively performed all of these experiments on all these different species. You used radiological and biological weapons to salt the Earth on numerous planets. You specifically targeted population centres in numerous instances. Blah, 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 blah. There was lots of things that were put together, and yes, there wasn't a unified international law or convention, but all of the nations that had won the war and were neutral pretty much banded together and went, yes, this is wrong. And therefore, she was sentenced to death, and she was killed for it. And Capital paid the price. They were occupied, and, then everything fell apart. And the point is that, these international laws and conventions, you're absolutely free to, create your own organisations and the like. As said, the Talcet Accords are a attempt to effectively make this kind of international sentient rights, along with numerous other laws, like a Geneva Convention of sorts, to kind of bring the galaxy into a more civilized age. Meanwhile, on the other end of the scale, you've got the CGSS that effectively don't really care about the sort of political and moral standpoint from it. They're more from an economic perspective, where it's like, hey guys, we're going to accede to these economic sort of generally agreed upon points, and therefore that's going to keep the intergalactic economy going and everything else that's going on at the same time. But we're not going to interfere with wars and stuff, but we will be used as a forum to potentially converse and try to stop these conflicts. Post-war, the CGSS is probably going to work very close with the Talcet Accords, especially because now the CGSS has made the CSRG, which is kind of like a general reactionary group of forces from CGSS nations that are responding to stuff like the Army of the Panopticon and the Old Invaders, etc. So there's going to be a lot of probably post-war, or maybe even late war, or even mid-war, depending on how stuff goes, overlap between lots of galactic organisations that are probably going to pretty much band together and try and help create some sort of foundation using international law and building this kind of stable place from which the galaxy can then build into a more peaceful and prosperous time. So, but yeah, that's what I wanted to say, really.
Sort of building on that point a little, when you were especially talking about the end of 2AW, a lot of the legal stuff, that history is written by the victors. The same applies to the law. The people who are in charge, they can make new laws, yes, but they can also repeal things that they don't like. So please take that into consideration when you're writing the laws for your nations. the people who are in charge currently have a lot of control over that kind of thing. So if they want to do a complete 180 flip from the last regime, then go for it. Have them rewrite all of these things that were once commonplace, because that's just how the world works, honestly. Yeah. But of course, any law, any system is only as good as how you can like enforce and uphold that system. That's something also that you need to consider when creating these things. This is where the executive branch of your government comes in, the people who actively go out and make sure that these rules are followed by people. This is where you'll get a lot of the interactivity between like your government and your people. So your police force, how you punish certain crimes. I like to especially think of fines in this regard, or like the hierarchy of how things are punished. How serious things are. The more serious the punishment, how seriously the establishment considers these rules. So there's a hierarchy inbuilt here from the beginning anyway. But yeah, the job of enforcing and upholding, it's not just about punishment and deterrent or anything like that. It's also about providing this effective system that is available to all of your citizens to be able to go out and get justice themselves. So you can be like, yes, I have this police state who keep everyone under their thumb, and we like have big surveillance and everything, and no crimes happen and whatever. But you also need to consider, on the flip side, you need to make it easy for people to achieve justice themselves if that's the kind of system that you want. You can, on the flip side, then create a system where it's not easy to get justice, which is fine, which is great, but make sure that you work with that. So if you don't want an effective and just system, then use that in the rest of your nation in your writing. Make it so it actually has an impact on the people that live in your nation. Because, yeah, as I said, the law is only as good as how you can uphold it. And that is especially prevalent when you get to international agreements, actually. That's when it becomes obvious how good a system is. Because what's the point of having a law if you're just going to go and let some other nation go and trample all over what they've said they're going to do? If the law holds no power, if anyone can just go back on what they've agreed to and just go and shit all up the walls, essentially. So if you want a system that like is renowned for working, then you need to put in the effort to make sure that it's upheld, that there are consequences for breaking these laws. But then if you want a system that is actually really shit, like something like Corona, then yeah, you can have a system that doesn't work at all and nothing is upheld and everything is just chaos. So pick the way that you want your system to swing and lean into it fully. Go with it wherever it takes you. But do consider, when you have a system that isn't quite working the way it should be, just be sure to like fully go with where it takes you. Make sure that you delve into like the consequences of what that means for people. So you could have building unrest, for example, because nothing ever gets done in a nation. There's all these problems and no one seems to be doing anything about it. Or like you've got things that are going through a bureaucratic process that are just taking way too long. That's another problem that you can play with. Or it can swing the other way, where you've got a system that is reacting far too quickly to all of these different stimuli. For example, there's a problem. Your legislature jumps on it immediately, starts writing up all these laws really quickly, pushes something out, and then a few years down the line, it's found out that there's lots of loopholes in there, or it's not quite written the way that it should have been. There's not enough detail, and then that can lead to problems of its own down the line. So make your system as enforceable as you want it to be, but make sure that you follow all of those like plot hooks through to make it feel more real.
I have something to add.
Oh, yes, please.
There is actually an advantage to developing a sort of in-depth and really thought out legal system. Because, for example, the two examples for me, like number one, Vaplana, number two, Velka Chernolovka. Those two countries are considered the places to go if you actually want fair and balanced legal representation and a hearing of your case, which like directly or indirectly makes you really influential without needing to have like massive military fleets or like huge factories or whatever. If you are just considered by the rest of the galaxy to be a good, like sharp and fair arbitrator, then that will immediately attract very important entities that are going to settle your disputes in front of a court that is agreed upon and recognized by most of the galaxy.
Yeah, that is a really good point. You can link your legal systems to types, like areas of your nation that I couldn't think of up the top of my head. It's such a foundational core of your nation that it's really important to sort of consider all of the consequences of creating it the way you do. Yeah. If there's any other sort of consequences like that that you can think of, throw them in, use them, run with them, because yeah, the possibilities are endless. Essentially, this is such core stuff that we're talking about that you can really do anything with it. You can make it whatever you want.
And there was a question by Varen.
Oh yeah.
If a case is decided in one nation, why does another nation accept and acknowledge that ruling? Well, that actually, I would say, and I think he would agree, that it depends. That goes into like geopolitical power territory. For example, Severogorsk, a nation that has slavery and just arbitrarily like condemns people to like decades of gulag forced labor because of some weird like crime that only exists in their esoteric interpretation of Marxism. They decide that somebody's guilty. No one is going to accept that, and they are going to accept that person as refugee because Severogorsk doesn't really matter in the geopolitical scale. If you have a fair system of laws, a lot of people are going to flock to it. But at the same time, you need to have either a direct or an indirect way of enforcing it. If you are considered objective and trustworthy on your judgments, then a lot of nations are just gonna automatically turn towards you to solve their like economic disputes, to do corporate arbitration and stuff. And little by little, they're just gonna get used to you being the voice of authority in international disputes, and they are going to consider your rulings to be applicable to them, and and they are going to do things like extradition treaties. They're going to like copy your laws and stuff. But on the other hand, if you are some you're like irrelevant shithole that constantly attacks their neighbors and is hated by everyone, then your opinions and rulings on things are likely not going to be taken seriously at all by the intergalactic community. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
I
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And to sort of build off of it a little, in real life, the first example that I can kind of think is how companies do business, especially international companies. When they're creating their agreements, their trade deals, their contracts, they will pick a country in the world to go to if they have a disagreement. Um, so they will both sort of survey all of these different systems and be like, okay, if we do have a conflict, then this is the place we will go to. This is the place that we both agree that we will go to hash everything out, and we will deal with our conflicts under their rule of law. That can sort of apply to international on the like intergalactic scale as well. If you're creating a treaty with another nation, you can have a clause written in there to say if we have a dispute, we will treat it as if it's under this system of law, like this nation's system of law or this nation's system of law, as long as it's like something that is reasonable for both parties to agree to. So I'd say it wouldn't be fair if Vaplana and the Union were making a deal, for example, and the Vaplana was like, "Oh yeah, no, if we have a disagreement, it will be under our law, definitely." That's not how it works. That's not good business. So you do want to pick a neutral third party, say another ally of both of the nations. Then that way it's a lot more realistic. And yeah, there is always the possibility that when relations break down and you do go to this neutral third party, that one side is going to get a bit butthurt and is not going to want to follow what that neutral third party says. And if that's how you want to run it, then so be it. But do consider that there might be international like consequences for that, and not necessarily legal ones specifically. Think about your nation's reputation, how they want to be viewed by the wider galaxy, but also like in terms of economics. If you go back on what you said you will do with a business partner, then how likely is it that other nations are going to want to like work with you? That could have a real impact on your nation's economy, on their social standing, all sorts. So yeah, you don't have to accept rulings of other nations, but consider what the consequences will be if you don't. You might get your ass kicked, for example, by a big like trading power block. So yeah, if you want that to be the consequences, then go for it. But if you don't, then maybe have a second thought. So yeah, power blocks is another really cool way of like incorporating international law, because the treaties that you create in those agreements can be the building blocks for something that develops in time to be something greater. Just something to consider. It's a great way of making new alliances with different nations and all of that stuff. Um, yeah. So having an extreme nation type, that can make having laws a bit more complicated. I kind of struggled thinking up points for this section, but the main extreme nation type that I thought of was a hive mind. And there was a few ideas that I had that you could sort of roll with for having a legal system for this type. You can have the sort of judge via your peers approach. So you're just like every member of the hive mind has an opinion, and then all of those opinions are weighed up, and whoever wins wins. You can create the system to be as strict or as loose as you want it to be in terms of following precedents, or you can do it as a case by case basis. With extreme nation types, you have a lot of flexibility to make the laws as you see fit. Um, yeah, with hive minds, you could also go the other way. For example, you could have the dictator style. We have elected this one member of the hive mind, or like say there's like a sort of queen or something, or like I'm kind of thinking like the Geonosians here. They have the queen. That's the person that we've selected who their like word is law, essentially. Does anyone have any other ideas for any extreme nation types that we could bounce ideas off of each other? Because this is quite fun, but also a challenge.
Minarchist, as a little
Anna,
libertarian, as close to an anarchy as possible.
Oh my goodness. I can just imagine that would be pure chaos. Because from my understanding of what anarchists are, they don't want any like establishment in place. That they don't. So who would be there to sort of
The
give all of
meme,
these rules?
the meme is that anarchists don't actually disagree with hierarchies, but with unjust hierarchies. So in theory, and there's probably like half of all anarchists ever that are gonna disagree with this. You would like to have a judge that is democratically elected specifically for this case, apply rules that have been democratically agreed on specifically for this case.
Oh my
So
goodness.
it doesn't run on like precedent or some like a government backed like a solid symbolic corpus of law, but it gets decided on the spot. It's like it veers very close to mob law, just like lynch this bastard, fuck him. But
Yeah.
it has like this layer of democracy that is added in between, so that it just doesn't turn into just complete chaos.
But that in itself to me sounds very chaotic. Coming from the sort of legal education I've had, a lot of what makes the law reliable is that sort of precedent or knowing what the outcome will be before you even go in. So having a system like that to me screams chaos because how are you meant to tell if you've got a good case or not if when you go in you have no idea how it's going to end? So yeah,
Yeah,
but that's something to
the
come back
danger
to.
is that it turns into like rhetoric, and whoever has the most charismatic lawyer just makes the law.
Yeah.
So
I
that
mean,
is
if you
one
want a
danger.
system
Like
that's like that, then yeah. Yeah, no, if you want a system that sort of is very chaotic and is sort of like whoever's the most popular person, they get the pick of the draw, then create something a bit like that where you cannot possibly reliably predict how something is going to how something is going to process through a court. If you want a chaotic system, that would be my recommendation. Create something that you just have no idea of like how to guess it.
I got something to add about like hive minds,
Yeah.
right? Gestalt and hive minds. Uh, Technically, they are one single organism, and they do not really operate along laws. They just operate along sort of a homeostatic principle where they try to like achieve a nice equilibrium within themselves. And if somehow an individual within the hive mind starts like taking everything that it can and not give it back, I think that is less of a judicial problem and more of an immune problem. Because at least in canon and with the multiple hive minds that they are, if you get a parasite that is abusing the system that the hive mind works upon, it gets treated like cancer and it gets excised, which is just completely outside of the like concept of human trials. But at the end of the day, it is how the human body and how the animal body and whatever the body treats elements that are taking advantage of the system. Okay, you are absorbing all the nutrients, but you're not actually doing anything for the whole. We're gonna send some like immune cells to kill you. It's not it's not really a nice or widely applicable legal system, but it is how a body works. And I always assume that hive minds work holistically the same way that a single body works. Like you don't hold a trial for a tumor. A tumor is just bad, and it get and your body fights it.
That could lead to some interesting trials about whether or not a segment of a hive mind is actually an independent living thing.
Oh, I love the ramifications of that. That could be a really, really good story.
Especially since there's some like in Ancerious, there is some horrific precedent to when that has happened. Like hive
Palmolive.
minds splitting off of each other always ends up in nightmare. So I will assume that there's already like a big bias against that, and to just assume that the general hive mind is right. But there might be cases in which the minority is actually reclaiming their universal rights. And I'm like, no, why do I have to be a platelet that just throws itself onto a wound and dies so that the whole body can survive? I am an individual being. I have right to I have the right to live. I have the right to self determination, and you could actually defend that in court. In one of the like widely recognized courts in the series. And very proud of my.
She fought her legal battle.
My is an interesting case of like of one of the things that Kier was talking about the purview of what a legal system is and how far it can go and what it can dictate. Because my was property. She was the like intellectual property of a corporation who designed her to be like this cute little uh, biological robot that could attend to needs in the service sector industry. And as such, she got developed pretty much like you would develop an iPhone. She got like a tested. She got there were prototypes that were rejected and euthanized. She had a good friend that helped her like develop psychologically. Then when the job was done, then that friend was gotten rid of, and eventually she just came to realize, or somebody made her realize that no, you're a human, you have universal rights, and you are being treated like property. And probably, possibly one of the most like famous trials in series history, besides the Inara trial, is like my affirming, even though there's a ton of them. There's lots of clones of my. They're all identical. They have the same personality, the same background, same genetics, etc. And my herself is affirming, no, I'm not property. I'm not a design of somebody else. I am a sovereign person. I have feelings. I have rights, and I believe that that you raised me wrong. That all this like research and development on all of this like genetic prototyping and reiteration, if you did that to somebody who you recognize as a person, you would immediately say that it's a crime. So why is it not a crime in my case? And Gotha Technic, which was the people who just came up with her genome and who just programmed her mind and everything, they were kind of stumped. They didn't really expect the her to do that. So they tried to calm her down, but Vaplana lawyers and the state of Vaplana kind of pushed the issue forward. Like, no, this isn't just like a meat computer. This is just a person that you've created. And just because you've created her doesn't give you ultimate sovereign right over what she does. Much in the same way as a parent does not have ultimate sovereign right over their children. So let's actually debate this. Let's actually decide upon this on the court of Velka Chernovka, the other country that is pretty liberal, I would say, when it comes to granting rights to people. And there they came to sort of impasse on what design. Okay, what is a person? We have to decide this right now, or none of this makes sense. And my lawyers, the planner lawyers, uh, put out their case on saying like, no, this is a. You might have created her, yes, you created her and you engineered her consciousness from top to bottom, but it is not because of that she is property, that she is just a product that can be patented and sold. No, she is a human, a sentient, a hive mind with a weird work, and as such, she is guaranteed rights under both the Vaplanan and the Chernolovkan jurisdictions. And you are trying, like, if you had done this to a child, it will immediately be recognized as a crime by 90% of the jurisdictions in Ancerious. So like, why you're trying to treat her as property? And they made like a very good case about why universal rights go beyond your where you were born, the conditions in that you were raised, why you were created, what kind of like weird nonlinear consciousness you have. No, universal rights are universal rights, period, and they apply to this person in particular, no matter what, like how much did Gotha spend developing her. And as such, she's not property, she's a person, and she has the right to choose what to do with herself as a person. And she won the case. She actually defeated Gotha, and Gotha eventually just reorganized into practically just a genetic support facility, and that is one of the most like famous legal victories for human rights or for sentient rights in a series. Just like defending the fact that there is no if, ands, or buts. This is a sentient organism. I don't care if you created it. I don't care if you designed it. I don't care if you have a patent to every single like piece of data in her genome. If it thinks, it has the right to think on its own. And the planet just like crushed the jury on that one.
Very based.
Moral of the story is, at some points, it doesn't get worse.
There are wins.
There are wins, yeah. You have to look for them.
So I guess just questions now, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Varen's asked, this brings an interesting idea. What about species who do not see other species specifically as sentient? For example, say a nation of humans refuses to see a nation of sheep people as sentient. How exactly is a galactic consensus established?
Have that. There's actually precedent for that. Which my mind was not seen as sentient.
And then she was.
Like Gotha's defense was, no, she's not sentient. Like everything that she's saying right now and all of her mannerisms are not her person. We just programmed that into her. If she wants candy, it's not because she wants candy. It's because we programmed her to like want a certain amount of sugar every like cycle of time. And the court decided it doesn't matter. She like fits every definition of a sentient, and it doesn't matter if you like interfere with what she wants. She her wants and her rights are sovereign. And I think this like precedent, which is applied to a ton of nations, because my minds are just all over the fucking place, would apply also to like the sheep people or whatever.
But would they? This case brings in my mind, this is the trigger for a ton more legal cases all across the galaxy, debating essentially the same question, but there being small differences, as Varen said, to evolved organisms that have no apparent tampering in their origins. There will be thousands of cases of this kind of thing. Is this species sentient? Is this specific species sentient? Who knows? There are gonna be loads more legal cases in Ank's immediate coming up that will try and establish whether specific cases are or are not. So the question is to all of Ankh, is that ruling for my gonna stick? Or are there going to be lots of different cases where the outcomes are different?
I think.
This is something
Oh,
that.
sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say it ties into the Bratva law case, because in that particular instance they did not consider lump and corona to be sentient.
That was like one of the. That is a. I think only Kira can get us out of the legal gauntlet of this one, because and a thing gets killed, a lump and corona, which is usually it is genetically human, but it is seen at the level of like a wild dog. It is something to be disposed of, and it is not considered sentient by any polity in the galaxy, including the place that they originate from, which is the Third Republic of Corona. However, during a trip in a spaceship, faster than light, one of these lump and corona get killed. And as it happens, the Northern Star Republic declares that that all rights to coronans also apply to lump and coronans. But the signal does not make it in that there is like a time desynchronization between the ship and the rest of the galaxy. So when the crime happened on board the ship, lump and corona had no right. But if you look at an objective galaxy-wide timeline, the lump and corona got killed when he had rights. So you get this like relativistic, like Einstein time distortion that has to be like treated as legal, has to be treated in a legal way, because is this precedent? Because from one point of view, the crime happened after the declaration of lump and corona rights. From another one, it happened before, so it's not a crime. It's just pest control.
And that could bring in some serious precedent of, well, if we're retroactively applying sentient rights, what about in this instance where the Globnarchians basically genocided these specific species because they didn't class them as sentient, but we now class them as sentient. Therefore, we need to revisit that case from 120 years ago, and the Globnarch needs to be punished for it.
Yeah, that is like that in character, like in the actual Bradford thing. That is exactly the reason why they're just absolutely desperate to make sure that it doesn't leave the ship. They just deal with it. Just find somebody guilty. We'll just vent them, and I don't care what the implications of this are. Because the superintendent of the ship where that happened knows the absolute fuckfest can of worms that is going to be unleashed if this is if like relativistic time distortion and retroactive law are applied at the same time.
Okay, Drac asks, does AI fit into the same category as a combination of my mind and hive minds?
Yes, and there is a specific example of that, which is Anika Svejana, who has rights. And she kind of like freeloaded off of my and off of her president. Her case went much more like smoothly than my, which was really long and really anguishing, and they had to bring up a lot of like hurtful things during evidence. But Anika was just kind of like, hey, I will move my servers here. I will pay taxes here, and I will get Channel citizenship As long as you like treat me like a person. As long as if somebody treats me badly, I can sue them. If I do business in somewhere, I pay taxes. I can have my own money, etc. So General Ofka also like grants rights to the to AIs, but in that right, AIs just naturally, just like pure AIs, they just naturally gravitate to their environment, which is the rhizomes, where incomprehensible fucking non-Euclidean, like non-linear AI law makes sense there, and not so much if you try to like apply actual the law and the moderation in terms of service of the rhizomes into the into like a legal system, it doesn't make sense at all. Like you see that this thing is clearly designed. It's like a hybrid of like copyright law, patent law, human rights, sentient rights. There is a distinction between AI code and AI instance. There is a whole bunch of like weird stuff that not in a million years would apply to a human. So if you're an AI, besides Anika, if you're an AI that just likes to talk to other AIs, you would probably like prefer to move to whichever rhizome fits your ideas of the world best. Because the rhizomes, since they are interconnected, they kind of follow a vote with your feet principle, which is okay. If you disagree, leave. You can just download yourself in like a minute and a half to the rhizome that's on the other end of the galaxy. So the rhizomes are also constantly evolving their laws and their moderation policies to be more attractive ones. They want to they want to be populated by like popular AIs. They want nice AIs. They want to just they don't no rhizome wants to just like be the dumpster of bots and like crypto shells. They want to have like an actual thriving community of tax-paying AIs. But their law is so complex and so convoluted and so like out of phase with what is human law that most of the times it cannot even be translated into into human language. If you try to like enunciate a law in Horizon in English, it straight up doesn't make sense.
All right. Any other questions? And good lord, we've covered a lot today.
It's only been like an hour or two, hasn't it?
An hour and a half nearly.
I haven't felt it.
Lots of stuff being covered.
But private arbitration. I think that deserves a mention of its own.
What was that, sorry?
Private arbitration.
Oh, okay, so like company
Yes.
stuff. Yeah, I consider company law a sort of subsect of national law because obviously the rules of a nation will dictate how and under what circumstances you can set up companies and the rules that they can create for themselves. But a company's charter, for want of a better word, is the rules that the company sets upon itself for it to follow and for the people that it employs to follow. And then going down from that, then there's the contracts that they will have with either other companies or their employees, which again have a lot of different rules in them, which are kind of like laws, but obviously not quite as big and impactful as nationwide laws, but still as enforceable as anything else. Contract is a great way of imposing your own rules with other people, and especially with enforcing all of this, you want to think about how a company would actually be able to enforce it on a wider scale. Yeah, you can have intercompany or just within the company itself their own way of dealing with things, but there might be circumstances in which an infraction is more serious and would be elevated to a nation level. Um, yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas on that topic.
I will say that in general, like companies and corporations and like space cyberpunk people would generally prefer private arbitration to actually going to court. Private arbitration is when you and the person you disagree with, you both agree on something, and that something is that there is an authority that you both can say is legitimate, and you go to that authority and you say, "Hey, I think this guy ripped me off. No, it was him who ripped me off," and then the private arbitrator is going to decide like what went wrong, and is going to like perhaps decide on who has to pay who. However, this is not legal. This is not like, legally binding. The private arbitrator is just a company or like a corporate entity that exists for the purpose of settling disputes between companies. And you can always say just fuck you, I disagree with the arbitrator. But then you get taken to court. So the arbitrator has to have like the backing of something more powerful than itself. The advantage of it, of course, is that if you solve things through private arbitration, you don't have to go through like a national justice system, and you don't have to like unveil certain things that you don't want to be seen. It's a sort of like, okay, let's keep it between us. Let's keep it between trusted parties. Let's not get the government involved.
Okay.
I'd say,
Oh, sorry.
oh,
No, go on.
I was just gonna say having like a system of arbitrators is another good way of building up either a character or a nation's credibility in the wider galaxy. Um, it's a great way to build reputation. It's a good way to get a lot of economic power, because it's a way of like a lot of corporations or nations will go to you and trust you to sort of keep their secrets and to deal with things for them. So maybe that's something that would come into play more in character RP potentially. If you have a character who wants that kind of soft power over all of these important people in the galaxy, then maybe that's a career path that they might want to consider.
So, Blank asks, have any other nations built their legal systems essentially from scratch during gameplay or RPs as examples to look at?
Corona,
Sorry?
Corona, I guess. I kind of came up with that on the fly.
Yeah, I'd say like Corona, Vaplana, Velka, the Union. Kira kind of like helped me make the Union's legal system. EOS to an extent, I guess. Capital? Like, ish?
Capital, there hasn't been much like talk of or like appearances from the capital judiciary.
Yeah, that's mostly because, like, for the longest time it didn't necessarily exist. It was more like, hey, you've just been found doing something you shouldn't. Damn. If only somebody had survived that.
And even now, like Capital as a country is like a really institutionally weak nation. It is run by a syndicate, basically.
Yeah. Trying to think what other nations have like really fleshed out judicial systems that have made them in RP.
It's Vaplana and Chernolovka with the Mai thing and with the Anika thing. I would say that those are the ones that have like the in character lore as to how they behave and what they believe.
Yeah.
This is like the opposite of an answer, but Carnath has a lot of room for that because I have literally no idea how their judicial system works, and it's the one gap I've always had on their nation sheet.
Which is cool, because then it gives you a nice slate to work from, because if I remember correctly, Carnath has a great deal of corporations and powerful families.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Carnate is. I think if you're going to develop Carnate's judicial system and laws, you should like double down on the anachronism of a really recent species that may or may not have time to just like process things such as universal abstract AI rights, but at the same time it's incredible. It's incredibly technological.
Mm-hmm.
It would
Like,
also
you
be.
can-
I was
like,
just gonna. Go on.
with the idea that they like have nightmare monsters to moralize their people. It's sort of the idea that their elites, I would say, are kind of heavy-handed, and they know how to get the Carnathians to believe in something.
That'd be cool. What I was going to suggest as well is that while Carnath the state has its own judicial system with like precedent laws, because I believe that Carnage should have a very precedent set system of, oh, well, this happened in the past, we're going to go off of this judgment, we're going to sort of base the ruling off of this particular instance, but because it's a bit different, we'll change it. It should be like that, but the actual state side of it should be very, very, very weak. And it should basically all be, because Carnath is a very corporate and like big family orientated state, the judicial system should be exactly the same. So it should be like, oh, do you have one of the big name lawyer families defending you? Because they have like basically the state judicial system in their pocket. They have a massive web of allegiances and alliances. If you get the right fucking lawyer who is really well known, they're going to just get you out of, mass murder, no problem. But if you can't afford that sort of stuff, you're going to have to go down the rungs. You're going to have to go to like lesser legal families or lesser legal corporations that are going to try and like win your case. And you've got to bring in like vast amounts of money to be able to try and fight that case. And if the prosecution's been taken up by like, again, something like much higher, good luck, you're probably not going to make it. But, sometimes it does happen. But like, it should be, in my opinion, the Carnathian judicial system should be an absolute, like, cutthroat, giga, precedent and giga, like, family and, like, big name orientated. I guess, like, the UK is a bit like that in terms of some, like, legal firms. Like, oh, you've got this legal firm on your side, therefore, you're probably going to win the case. Not because, they're controlling the legal system itself, but because they're known to be really, really, really good, and everyone will work with them. So because these big legal firms or big legal families are really good at winning the cases and everything, they also then have ties to the military, the civil sector, the industrial sector, like, you name it. They've dealt with everyone, they've won, disputes with everyone, therefore, everyone loves them. And they're the ones who are going to get it done. That would be some cool sauce.
No, I like all of that, and I feel some sauce coming on.
Excellent.
I think one natural thing that this topic lends itself to is the lack of a judicial system. Nations that have extremely weak or non-existent judicial systems.
Good times. Okay, Varen asks, what about cases if a nation doesn't recognise corporations as having rights to sue or seek legal action?
then the corporations are just not going to operate or seek cases in your jurisdiction. Like, that's like me trying to sue somebody in a nation that doesn't recognize humans as sentient. Just by the fact that you do not recognize a moral person's ability to sue, that's just immediately gonna like uh, scare all of the big companies away. Because companies want to have rights. They don't want to just like get all of their stuff copied or get their factories repossessed for no reason and get abused. And so if you just straight up say companies have no rights, fuck y'all, we can just take your shit at any time we want. You're not like the companies are probably not gonna be there in the first place, which goes obviously for most of the communist or anarcho-communist countries in a series, which absolutely do not recognize like a legal person's right to sue over some over some stuff. They do not recognize corporate personhood. They do not recognize any of this. Same time, there's also countries that do not recognize people's right to do this.
Nice. All right. Any other questions?
I will add something about my note on like weak or non-existent judicial systems.
Go for it.
Is that when it doesn't exist, when the law is weak and there are no like legitimately recognized judges or a judiciary, it's probably gonna fall onto some other part of your government. Usually, the part that has either blackmail or guns. So it's not gonna be pretty. And if the government itself is too weak to enforce that, it's gonna fall further down to the like second echelon of like families and connections. And if you're an actual failed state, it the it's gonna fall like this third bottom tier, where it's just gonna become like the law of the strongest. And some countries do operate by the law of the strongest. Some like you cannot even call them countries. You can just call them like territories, whatever.
I think that goes quite well. All right. I guess we will leave it there then. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you very much, Kira, for all of your excellent input.
Thank you very much,
everyone
Kira.
for listening to me ramble. Thanks for being here, guys.
All right. Well, we will catch you next time.